So, what aspect of being LGBTQ do you think should have more focus or be talked about more?
Honestly, I feel like it's more about what I want talked about less. I think that a lot of the queer community is very young, and that's, I mean, it's fine, things have been normalized more recently. And as a product of that, there are a lot of people who are kind of defending their identities by leaning really hard into them in a way that sometimes I think can be kind of weird or counterproductive. So, like, as a gender abolitionist, for example, I've always felt like people should not even just about gender, more about like labels in general, right? I think that the best world is one in which we have very refined language with how to describe ourselves, but we don't feel a need to use it very often, if that makes any sense. We can pinpoint with great specificity like what we believe, what we are, how we identify, how we feel, but the need to define yourself with such specific terms is not great because there's just a general acceptance of your identity, even if it's like atypical as long as you're not hurting people. But in a lot of queer communities there is a lot of just, oh god, just conversation and conversation and discourse and discourse and discourse and discourse and discourse and discourse about things that, to me, the most progressive answer would be like a sort of quiet acceptance, if that makes any sense.
Hmm. Yeah,
Like,
I get what you're saying. Like, where they're producing like all these different labels for these different specific situations and character traits rather than accepting that human language is like limited in its scope of being able to encapsulate the human experience.
yeah, it's like a good example of this would be flags, right? Like,
Hmm.
we've all, I mean, you've probably seen, but like the jokes of
The
like the
Joker flag,
20,
yeah.
right. And there are like 20 flags, and it's like, well, this one's more progressive than this one. And well, this one, now we aren't excluding intersex people, or now this time we're not excluding asexual people, whatever. And you can do this forever, right? You can break people down into a literally infinite number of categories. And I feel like, in a way, you're actually doing the segregationist job for them by insisting on distinction along these categorical lines, Nobody was ever discriminated against, in a way particular to some hyper-specific, nuanced uh, element of their identity that wouldn't have applied to, like, the broader label of queer or trans or stuff like that. At a point, there's no longer any utility to the definitions you're using, and it just becomes a kind of categorical satiation that makes you feel special for having a term that describes you so specifically. But at that point, we're talking nicknames. So maybe we should roll back our obsession with that level of hyper specificity, and instead we should focus on broader aims. Let's minimize the infighting. Let's work on positive messaging that's effective at carrying all of us across the water, stuff like that. Of course, there's nothing wrong with having the specific language when called upon, but sometimes it
Yeah.
just gets into like weird infighty stuff. Like, God, if you see some of the TikTok discourse, and every once in a while these videos make their way to my eyeballs, it's like the like bi lesbian discourse, like bi lesbian, as far as I understand it, usually just refers to like homo romantic bisexual for the most part. I think that's what
Yeah.
seems to be the case. But the term bi lesbian is kind of constructed to exacerbate discourse, which there's nothing wrong with that inherently. I mean, who doesn't like a bit of controversy? But then when you start arguing about it, like within the community, it's like, well, how much utility are we getting from this exactly? How much of this is just like, let's be real, like trying to feel special, Not that there's anything wrong with that, but we have to be deliberate with how we speak and move when talking about social issues.
And that's actually going to lead into a what do you think within the LGBT community, what the most pressing issue within the community itself is?
This is kind of like a broad lefty thing, but the need to move past infighting is always pretty essential, I think. It can be
Mhm.
it can be incredibly destructive. The impulse to defend your group against some kind of optically damaging fringe element of another in a way that hurts both of you. So, for example, there are trans people who will, or binary trans people who will distance themselves from non-binary people because they say that non-binary people are going to empower straight people, genociding all of them or something. But this is like an infinitely fractal process, right? Stonewall, you know, trans people were very present at Stonewall, but after Stonewall, you know, the broader queer movement kind of went quiet about trans people, even though that was the one of the big kickoffs for the movement, because they knew that trans people would be much harder to defend than like cisgender gay people. So it was something that they essentially they threw them under the bus, you know. And tactical considerations like that are always going to be a part of social movements, but you know, sometimes you do have to put one up and form a united front. I don't know how much
definitely.
this happens today outside of the TERFs, though. They're the biggest one, right? They're trying to do the
Yeah.
whole LGB drop the T thing. That's like the biggest, most pervasive way in which this behavior is currently manifest.
Yeah, definitely. Turf Island is not helping.
Yeah, no, it's not. And they'll side with the far right too. I mean, it's very clear that if your fight for, quote, you know, women's liberation involves allying with anti-feminists, there's definitely some kind of misprioritization taking place. And, you know, the left movement, speaking of avoiding infighting, you know, the broader left movement is a little bit responsible for this, because for the longest time, feminists were not willing to oust man-haters from their community. I don't think that, by the way, man-hating feminists are like a huge portion of feminists or whatever, but they definitely are part of it. And
Definitely,
yeah, like the whole kill all men types. But a lot of feminists never wanted to question that behavior because they viewed it as a kind of concern trolling. You know, oh, you think feminists should stop hating men? Well, you're just a fake anti-feminist who is exaggerating a problem within the movement to serve your own political ends. Well, I don't know. I mean, it kind of turned into something pretty big and bad, didn't it? All of these TERFs now, I mean, they're kind of being mainlined by unironically misandrist lesbian cis women. That's something worth at least taking into consideration.
Yeah, I saw this one take that from this supposed feminist that was basically like, why do I have to like be nice to my little brother knowing he's gonna grow up to like abuse women like and like treat women like shit? And I'm just like, you're literally just saying I give up, you know, sexism gonna sexism. You know, I'm just gonna do what I want to do, and it's just like that's not how feminism or like a movement works. You don't just throw up your fucking hands and just be like men gonna men and, you know, quit.
It always comes down to essentialism, doesn't it? That's pretty much the root of every reactionary movement. The idea that bad things that people do are inherent to them on some kind of biological or spiritual level. So any effort at reaching out to them is either worthless or, you know, should be tempered with the knowledge that they're kind of naturally inferior.